When you think of New York, you probably think of New York City, where it is crowded and full of bad air. But that's the city, not the state. Plus, the city wasn't even there 500 years ago. In fact, according to a book called New York by Barbara Somerville, is that the whole state was and is full of beautiful ice sheets, glaciers, mountains, lakes, rivers, forests, and much, much more. And in this land a long time ago lived the Native Americans that have been there for a long time hunting, fishing, and building. Without knowing it, they were the first people there. A group of Iroquois-speaking people moved into what is now known as New York. The name Iroquois comes from an Algonquian word, Iroquois, which means real adders. Adders mean snakes, so to me, that must have been a bit of an insult. Their clans were named after animals, which were wolves, bears, and turtles. The first group to settle there were the Senecas. After this, there were soon more to come. The Iroquois League said that the League should be able to admit new states as equal members. In 1714, the League admitted the Tuscarora as the sixth member of the group. They functioned as a confederation of Indian nations. Where once there was only colonies of Native Americans, the Dutch had come in the mid-1600s and started to take over the land, mostly Manhattan. In the book New York, it said that New York was actually called New Amsterdam. It was called New Amsterdam because when the Dutch had gotten there, they named it after their home city of Amsterdam. They really had no tradition of colonization, and they were the type that loved to trade. The Dutch settled into the new land because while they were trading, their ship, the Tiger, caught on fire. So they really didn't have any choice but to stay in America. Once the Dutch were all settled, the British came along and took over. Once they were in charge, they made the land more modified like their home in Britain. They had owned the land for a long time until the Dutch made a plan to take back what was rightfully theirs. Once the Dutch had taken it back, they had to just keep what was there from what the British had made and just kept on living. The Dutch had New Amsterdam for about 5 years until the British took it back again. Finally, the Dutch gave up and just left it the way it was. But how New Amsterdam's name changed to New York is a different story. How New Amsterdam became New York was that King Charles II gave his brother James a gift, the Dutch colony of New Netherland. The king sent 4 ships carrying 450 men to the city of New Amsterdam. They forced the Dutch military director general, Peter Stuyvesant, to surrender both the city and the colony. New Netherland and New Amsterdam were renamed New York after the Duke of York. That would be the brother James. That is the story on how New York got its name. Now that all of the British took over, they began their culture and started to have slaves. Many of the first families who were British had slaves. Their numbers were gradually raised by new arrivals, which is very sad because of the way the white people would treat the black people. Some of the slaves wanted to fight back, but they found that there was no use to it because more owners would just gain on them and torture them terribly. All the schools that kids went to were separated by race. Some of the blacks fought back by burning down a white person's house in the middle of the night, but then the next day they got tortured by other white people. Finally, one day, someone named Peter Williams, a slave, was born. He was very bright and quickly took the advantages of opportunities that came in his way. He went into business by a special arrangement made by his owner, and he became the undertaker, and he was so important of a member of this white church that one of its historians devoted 3 full chapters of his book to a biography of Peter Williams. I also have found that New York by Somerville had the list of crops that were located in New Amsterdam that the natives and the Dutch had used. They had cattle, dairy, fish, fruit, grains, hay, maple syrup, and natural gas, oil, potatoes, poultry, salt, sheep, shellfish, and vegetables. In more of the lower New Amsterdam, they had the dairy, hay, poultry, and grains. In upper New Amsterdam, there were fruits, vegetables, sheep, maple syrup, and potatoes. There were also some mining going on for gold. That is basically what most Dutch settlers came for. In conclusion, New York had a gigantic history that many people should learn about because it is very interesting. As you have learned, there is so much about New York than its crowded city and bad air.